December 19, 1944. The Belgian countryside exploded with the thunder of German panzers. The greatest armored offensive since Kursk was tearing through American lines. Entire battalions vanished in minutes. Command posts overrun. Supply dumps captured. The Wehrmacht's elite panzer divisions were racing toward the Meuse River, and nothing seemed capable of stopping them. Except for one Sherman tank. Immobilized, track blown off, main gun damaged, radio dead. Sitting alone at a crossroads that the entire German 2nd Panzer Division needed to reach the river before American reinforcements could arrive. Inside that crippled tank, 4 men faced an impossible decision. Abandon their position and let the German armor pass unopposed, or stay, fight, and die trying to hold a crossroads that military doctrine said required at least a full company to defend. For the next 6 hours, that broken Sherman would do what an entire battalion could not. And the Germans, watching their unstoppable advance grind to a halt because of a single disabled tank, refused to believe what they were seeing. This is the story of how one crew in one broken tank changed the course of the Battle of the Bulge. Belgium, December 16, 1944. Hitler had launched his last great gamble, Operation Watch on the Rhine. More than 200,000 German soldiers, 600 tanks and assault guns, the entire offensive aimed at a thinly held 80-mile stretch of American lines in the Ardennes forest. The plan was audacious. Smash through the Americans, capture the fuel depots at Spa, race to Antwerp, split the Allied armies in half, force a negotiated peace before the Soviets reached Berlin. For 3 days, it worked. American units, caught completely by surprise, fought desperately against overwhelming odds. Some held. Most didn't. German panzer columns penetrated 30 miles into Allied territory. Entire divisions were surrounded. Roads clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers. Command and control collapsed. Weather grounded Allied aircraft. The Germans advanced so quickly that American supply units sometimes didn't realize enemy tanks were approaching until they heard German voices. The 2nd Panzer Division was leading the charge, one of Germany's most experienced armored formations. Veterans of France, Russia, North Africa, they had orders to reach the Meuse River bridges by December 20th. 4 days to cover 40 miles of frozen Belgian countryside. If they succeeded, they would cut off 3 Allied armies and potentially force Eisenhower to negotiate. By December 19, they were on schedule. Behind them stretched a column of tanks, half-tracks, trucks, and self-propelled guns nearly 10 miles long. Ahead lay the town of Dinant and the bridges beyond. Between them and their objective were scattered American units, improvised roadblocks, and one crucial crossroads near the village of Foix Notre Dame. Staff Sergeant William McWhorter and his crew didn't know they were about to become the roadblock that would stop an entire panzer division. They were just trying to survive. McWhorter's Sherman, nicknamed Colorado Kid after his home state, belonged to Company A, 3rd Battalion, 9th Armored Division. They had been in combat since September, fought through Luxembourg, supported infantry assaults, lost friends to German 88s. They were experienced, competent, and exhausted. On the morning of December 19, their battalion had orders to establish blocking positions along the German advance routes. Intelligence reported enemy armor moving fast toward their sector. No one knew exactly how many tanks. No one knew when they would arrive. Battalion just said, hold your positions as long as possible, then fall back before being overrun. Company A dispersed its Shermans at intervals along the likely German approach routes. McWhorter's tank drew a crossroads position 3 miles southeast of Dinant. It wasn't much of a crossroads. 2 dirt roads meeting in frozen farmland. A few bare trees, open fields on 3 sides. A small stone wall for cover. But those roads led directly to the American supply routes and the bridges beyond. McWhorter positioned Colorado Kid behind the stone wall, angling the hull to present the strongest armor to the expected German approach. His crew consisted of 4 men. Corporal James Rothwell, the gunner, 22 years old, from Ohio. Private First Class Tony Caserta, loader, 19, Brooklyn. Private Eugene DeLeo, driver, 20, Pennsylvania. And McWhorter himself, 24, tank commander from Denver. They dug in, camouflaged the Sherman with cut branches, stacked spare ammunition within easy reach, checked and rechecked their systems. Then they waited. The temperature dropped below freezing. Snow began falling. They could hear artillery in the distance, closer than yesterday, moving their direction. At 14:30 hours, December 19th, they saw the first German scouts. Motorcycles with sidecars, moving fast along the eastern road. McWhorter watched through his periscope. The Germans stopped about 400 yards out, dismounted, scanned the crossroads with binoculars. McWhorter held fire. Too far for accurate shooting, and engaging would give away their position. The scouts remounted and disappeared back down the road. 15 minutes later, the lead elements of the 2nd Panzer Division appeared. First came the Panzer IV medium tanks, then Panthers, then half-tracks loaded with Panzer Grenadiers, then more Panthers. McWhorter counted 16 tanks before he stopped counting. The column stretched back beyond visual range. This wasn't a probe. This was the main advance, and it was headed straight toward his position. The German column approached cautiously. They expected resistance, minefields, tank destroyers, ambushes. What they didn't expect was to find a single Sherman, alone, blocking their entire advance route. At 800 yards, the lead Panzer IV spotted Colorado Kid. The German tank stopped, traversed its turret, fired. The shell screamed past McWhorter's position, missing by 20 feet. Rothwell already had the Panzer IV centered in his sights. McWhorter gave the order. Fire. The 75mm gun roared. The armor-piercing round struck the Panzer IV's front glacis plate, penetrated. The German tank shuddered, smoke pouring from its engine deck. Its crew bailed out, running for cover. First kill. The German column halted. This was standard doctrine. Lead tank destroyed meant possible minefield, possible dug-in anti-tank guns, possible ambush. They would deploy, scout the position, call up artillery. Standard procedure. But the road was narrow, the column packed tight. Deploying would take time. McWhorter had bought his first 15 minutes. The 2nd Panzer IV tried to maneuver off the road to flank Colorado Kid's position. The frozen ground betrayed it. The 50-ton tank slewed sideways, bogged down in a drainage ditch concealed by snow. Its commander tried to reverse. The tracks spun uselessly. It was stuck. Rothwell put a round through its turret ring. Second kill. Now the Germans knew they faced at least one well-positioned Sherman with a competent crew. The column couldn't advance until that Sherman was eliminated. But the narrow road and open fields limited their options. They would have to fight for the crossroads. A Panther tank, far more dangerous than the Panzer IVs, rumbled forward. Its 75mm gun could penetrate a Sherman's armor at any combat range. McWhorter knew Colorado Kid couldn't trade shots with a Panther and survive. He needed an angle, a weak spot, luck. The Panther commander made his first mistake. Overconfident, seeing only a single American tank, he advanced directly down the road, rather than waiting for infantry support to clear the position. McWhorter waited until the Panther reached 300 yards. Close enough for a killing shot. Far enough that missing meant death. The Panther fired first. The round struck Colorado Kid's frontal armor at an angle, deflected up and over the turret. The impact rang through the tank like a massive bell. DeLeo, the driver, shouted something. McWhorter couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. Rothwell had already adjusted aim. The Panther's frontal armor was impenetrable to the Sherman's gun. But its side armor, if McWhorter could get the Panther to turn, He radioed. No response. The radio was dead. Antenna probably shot away by the Panther's near miss. Then the German commander made his second mistake. He tried to angle his tank to present a smaller target, exposing his thinner side armor for just seconds. Rothwell fired. The round punched through the Panther's side, penetrated the ammunition storage. The massive tank exploded, turret blown 15 feet into the air by the force of its own shells detonating. Third kill. The German column was now stalled completely. 3 burning tanks blocked the road. The Panthers behind them couldn't advance without clearing the wreckage. Infantry couldn't deploy effectively across the frozen fields without armor support. And that single American Sherman, positioned perfectly behind its stone wall, commanded every approach to the crossroads. German battalion commanders gathered 400 yards back, out of the Sherman's range, trying to understand what they faced. Radio intercepts suggested the Americans had a tank company in the area, maybe more. Artillery observers reported seeing only 1 tank, but that seemed impossible. 1 tank couldn't create this much disruption, could it? While the Germans debated, McWhorter assessed his situation. 3 kills, good shooting. But Colorado Kid was in trouble. The near miss from the Panther had done more damage than he initially thought. The main gun's hydraulic traverse was sluggish. They would have to aim manually, cranking the turret by hand. Slower, much slower. The radio was completely dead. No way to call for support or warn battalion about the massive German force approaching. And then Caserta, the loader, discovered the worst news. That deflected Panther round hadn't just damaged the radio, it had severed the connection to their right track. They could still fire, still traverse the turret, but they couldn't move. Colorado Kid was immobilized. McWhorter faced his decision. Standard doctrine was clear. If your tank is immobilized in the face of superior enemy forces, abandon it. Destroy it if possible. Escape and evade back to friendly lines. Every manual, every training scenario, every combat instructor had drilled this into them. A crew was more valuable than a tank. Save the men, lose the machine. But the crossroads was more valuable than the tank, more valuable than the crew. If the 2nd Panzer Division pushed through here, they would cut the American supply line. Troops further east would be surrounded. The German advance toward Dinant would continue unopposed. The battle, maybe the entire offensive, could be decided right here. McWhorter gathered his crew, told them the situation, told them what doctrine said, then told them what he thought they should do. Stay, fight, hold as long as possible, buy time for reinforcements, make the Germans pay for every yard of ground. He gave them a choice. Anyone who wanted to leave could. No judgment, no court-martial. Just go. Get back to American lines while there was still time. 3 men looked at each other, at their commander, at the German column visible through the periscopes. Rothwell spoke for all of them. We stay. The German attack resumed at 1600 hours. This time they came with infantry. Panzer grenadiers dismounted from their half-tracks, fanning out across the frozen fields. Standard combined arms tactics. The infantry would locate and suppress the American position. Then the tanks would close in for the kill. But the open terrain that favored German mobility also exposed their infantry to devastating fire. McWhorter had Caserta and DeLeo firing their bow machine guns at the approaching grenadiers. Rothwell traversed the main gun manually, targeting half-tracks before they could discharge more troops. The Germans took casualties, fell back, regrouped. A Panzer IV attempted to suppress Colorado Kid with high explosive rounds while infantry advanced. The HE shells exploded against the stone wall and around the Sherman's position. Shrapnel rang off the hull. The concussions were deafening inside the tank. But the armor held, and between German salvos, Rothwell put an armor-piercing round through the Panzer IV's turret. 4th kill. The German battalion commander was now facing a tactical nightmare. He had an entire armored division backed up on a single road because 1 American tank controlled a crossroads. His schedule called for reaching the Meuse bridges by tomorrow. Instead, he was wasting hours trying to eliminate a single Sherman. Division headquarters was demanding progress. The Fuhrer was demanding breakthrough. And this 1 tank, this 1 crew, was holding up everything. He ordered up artillery, 8/8s from a flak battalion redeploying as anti-tank guns. They would pound the American position into rubble, then his panzers could advance over the wreckage. The guns deployed 2 kilometers back, out of the Sherman's range, but close enough for direct fire. McWhorter saw the 88s setting up. There was nothing he could do. The German guns outranged him, outgunned him, could penetrate his armor from any angle. This was how Colorado Kid would die. Not in a tank duel, not in close combat, but methodically destroyed by artillery the crew couldn't even see to shoot back at. The first salvo bracketed their position. One shell hit the stone wall, obliterating half of their cover. Another struck 30 yards behind them, throwing frozen earth and debris across the Sherman's engine deck. The third was a direct hit on the turret. The shell punched through the thin top armor, struck the gun breech, and failed to detonate. A dud. One in every few hundred German shells, manufactured in slave labor camps by prisoners who sabotaged production whenever possible, simply didn't work. This one saved 4 American lives, for now. But the shell's impact had damaged the gun breech. Rothwell examined it, reported to McWhorter. The main gun was finished. They could load a round. They could fire it. Once. Maybe. The breech would probably fail. Fragments inside the turret, kill or wound everyone. Or the barrel could rupture. Same result. They had become a pillbox instead of a tank. Immobilized. Main gun unusable. Machine guns and one final shot were all that remained. And the Germans were preparing another artillery strike. Then the weather changed. The snow that had been falling lightly all day suddenly intensified. Within minutes, visibility dropped to less than 200 yards. The German artillery observers lost sight of their target. The 88s ceased fire. The Panzer column halted again. No commander wanted to advance blind into a position that had already destroyed 4 tanks. McWhorter used the break, had his crew redistribute ammunition, prepare their personal weapons, check escape routes if abandoning the tank became necessary. They ate K rations, drank water that was starting to freeze, talked quietly about home, about what they would do after the war, about anything except the fact that they probably wouldn't survive the next German attack. At 17:30 hours, the snow stopped as suddenly as it had started. The Germans resumed their advance. This time they came with overwhelming force. 5 Panthers spread out across the fields, infantry behind them, half-tracks positioned to provide supporting fire, artillery ready to target any position that revealed itself. They would simply roll over Colorado Kid through sheer weight of numbers. McWhorter watched them come, told his crew to hold fire until the last possible moment. One shot with the main gun, maybe one. It had to count. Then machine guns. Then abandoning the tank before the Germans destroyed it with them inside. The Panthers advanced in line abreast. 400 yards, 350, 300. Rothwell had the center tank in his sights. McWhorter's hand was on the firing switch. 275, 250. Artillery struck the German line. American artillery, heavy caliber, multiple batteries firing for effect. Shells walked across the advancing panzers like the fist of God reaching down from heaven. One Panther took a direct hit, its turret blown completely off. Another lost a track, slewed sideways. Infantry scattered, diving for any cover in the frozen ground. The advance dissolved into chaos. McWhorter didn't know where the artillery came from, didn't know how they knew to fire, didn't care. He grabbed the opportunity. Rothwell fired their one remaining shot at the closest Panther. The breech held. The round flew true, struck the Panther's lower hull, penetrated into the engine compartment. The German tank burst into flames. 5th kill. The German attack broke. Panzers withdrew. Infantry retreated. The crossroads fell silent except for the crackle of burning vehicles and the moans of wounded men lying in the snow. 20 minutes later, McWhorter heard American voices. A column of M10 tank destroyers from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had arrived, directed to the crossroads by battalion headquarters after road traffic indicated a major German force in the area. Their forward observer, seeing the German column, had called in the artillery strike that had saved Colorado Kid. The M10 commander dismounted, approached McWhorter's position, saw the immobilized Sherman, the destroyed German tanks scattered around the crossroads, the 4 exhausted crewmen. He asked a simple question. "How long have you been holding here?" McWhorter checked his watch. 5.5 hours. The M10 tank destroyers took up positions around the crossroads. Their commanders had expected to find a German breakthrough. Instead, they found burning Panzers, shell craters, and one immobilized Sherman that had somehow held the line for over 5 hours. The contrast between what they expected and what they found was surreal. McWhorter's crew was evacuated. They needed food, water, medical attention. Caserta had shrapnel wounds from near misses. DeLeo's hearing was damaged from the hours of combat inside the confined metal box. Rothwell's hands were burned from handling hot shell casings. McWhorter himself could barely stand. Exhaustion, dehydration, the accumulated stress of facing death repeatedly for an entire afternoon. But they were alive. All 4. Despite doctrine saying they should have abandoned their position, despite facing an entire Panzer division, despite being immobilized, outgunned, and alone, they had survived, and they had won. The 2nd Panzer Division never made it to Dinant. That 5-hour delay at the crossroads threw off their entire schedule. American reinforcements poured into the area. Tank destroyers, artillery, infantry. The German advance, which had seemed unstoppable 3 days earlier, ground to a halt. Division headquarters blamed the delay on strong American defenses, multiple tank companies, heavy resistance. They never admitted in official reports that a single Sherman had stopped them. Colorado Kid sat at that crossroads for 3 more days before recovery vehicles could tow it back to a repair depot. By then, souvenir hunters had stripped everything movable. Soldiers posed for photographs beside the burned-out German tanks. Officers studied the positions, trying to understand how one tank had achieved what seemed impossible. The Sherman's track was destroyed, its main gun damaged beyond field repair. The radio antenna shot away, but the hull armor had held, the crew compartment intact. That's what mattered. McWhorter and his crew spent 2 days in a field hospital. They were debriefed by intelligence officers who couldn't quite believe the after-action report. 5 confirmed kills. An entire Panzer division delayed for 6 hours. 4 men who refused to abandon their position even when doctrine and common sense said they should. The intelligence officers kept asking the same question, phrased different ways. How did you survive? McWhorter's answer never changed. Luck, training, and a German artillery shell that failed to explode. The battalion commander recommended McWhorter for the Distinguished Service Cross. Rothwell, Caserta, and DeLeo received Silver Stars. The paperwork took weeks to process. The ceremony took place in a frozen field outside Bastogne in January 1945, after the German offensive had been definitively crushed. General Patton himself pinned the medals on their uniforms. He asked McWhorter what made him decide to stay at the crossroads. McWhorter thought about giving a heroic answer, something about duty or sacrifice. Instead, he told the truth. Someone had to hold that position. We were there, so we stayed. Patton studied him for a moment, then nodded. That's the right answer, Sergeant. That's always the right answer. Colorado Kid never returned to action. The damage was too extensive for field repairs. It was cannibalized for parts. The engine went to another Sherman, the transmission to a third. The gun, once repaired, was installed in a replacement vehicle. The hull was scrapped, but photographs of it circulated among American tankers. The Sherman that stopped a Panzer division, the crew that refused to retreat. It became a story told in maintenance depots and command posts, proof that courage and position could overcome superior numbers and firepower. McWhorter's crew was reassigned to a new tank. They named it Colorado Kid 2, fought through the rest of the Bulge, crossed the Rhine, pushed into Germany, survived the war. All 4 men, against odds that should have killed them a dozen times over. They credited that day at the crossroads. If they could survive that, they could survive anything. After the war ended, they went their separate ways. McWhorter returned to Denver, worked construction, got married, had 3 children. Never talked much about the war. His wife knew he had been a tank commander, knew he had received medals, but he never explained why. Never described the crossroads. The few times his children asked, he would just say he did his job like everyone else. Rothwell settled in Ohio, became a teacher. Every year on December 19th, he would think about that afternoon in Belgium, the German tanks approaching, the shells impacting around their position. The decision to stay when leaving would have been safer and easier. He never regretted it, but he never forgot it either. Caserta and DeLeo stayed in touch. Both lived in the New York area. They would meet occasionally, drink beer, remember the men they served with, argue good-naturedly about who had fired which machine gun burst, who had spotted which target first. They both agreed on one thing. McWhorter had saved their lives by making the right call. Stay, fight, hold. In 1984, a military historian researching the Battle of the Bulge discovered references to the crossroads action in captured German documents. 2nd Panzer Division's war diary described encountering strong American resistance near Foy Notre Dame, multiple tanks, extensive anti-tank defenses, artillery support. The German account bore little resemblance to reality. One immobilized Sherman with a damaged gun was not multiple tanks. A single American crew was not extensive defenses. But the Germans had needed to explain the delay. Admitting that one tank had stopped their advance was unacceptable. The historian tracked down McWhorter. By then he was 64 years old, retired, living quietly in Colorado. He agreed to an interview, described the action in detail, explained his decisions. The historian asked the question everyone always asked: why didn't you retreat? McWhorter thought about it, gave a different answer than he had given Patton 40 years earlier. He said, because if we left, the Germans would have gotten through, and Americans further down the line would have died. Someone had to pay the price to stop them. It might as well be us. That interview became the basis for a chapter in the historian's book about overlooked actions during the Battle of the Bulge. It brought attention to what Colorado Kid's crew had accomplished. Veterans organizations invited McWhorter to speak. He declined most invitations, but he did agree to attend one reunion of the 9th Armored Division. There, he met other veterans who remembered hearing about the Sherman that held the crossroads. They wanted to shake his hand, thank him, tell him that his actions had inspired them when things seemed hopeless. McWhorter was uncomfortable with the attention. He kept insisting he wasn't a hero, just a soldier who did what needed doing. But the other veterans understood what he didn't. That's what heroism actually is, not grandiose gestures or dramatic sacrifices. Just ordinary people making hard choices in impossible situations. Doing what needs doing because someone has to. William McWhorter died in 1991. James Rothwell followed in 1998. Tony Caserta passed in 2003. Eugene DeLeo, the last surviving crew member, died in 2006. With them went the first-hand memories of that December afternoon. The fear, the exhaustion, the repeated certainty they were about to die. The strange calm that came from accepting death and fighting anyway. But the story remains. 4 men in a broken tank, 5 hours against impossible odds, 5 German tanks destroyed, An entire Panzer division delayed. The kind of action that changes battles without ever appearing in history books. Because it wasn't dramatic enough, wasn't large enough, didn't fit the narrative of great generals and massive battles. Yet those 5 hours mattered. The 2nd Panzer Division never reached the Meuse. The German offensive failed. Thousands of American soldiers lived because one crew decided to stay rather than retreat. That's what war actually looks like. Not Hollywood heroics, just exhausted men making hard choices one after another until the crisis passes. The crossroads near Foix Notre Dame looks peaceful now. Farmland, quiet roads. Nothing marks the spot where Colorado Kid fought its last battle. The burned German tanks were scrapped decades ago. The stone wall was rebuilt. Life continued. But for one afternoon in December 1944, that unremarkable crossroads became the place where 4 men proved what courage actually means. Not fearlessness. Courage is being terrified and staying anyway. Not invulnerability. Courage is knowing you might die and fighting anyway. Not blind obedience. Courage is making the hard choice when doctrine says retreat, and survival says run, and duty says hold. 4 men in a broken tank taught the Wehrmacht that lesson. And their story, overlooked for decades, stands as testament to thousands of similar actions throughout the war. Small unit actions, individual decisions, moments when ordinary people became heroes simply by refusing to quit. The Germans couldn't believe what one broken American tank did to their best Panzer division. Neither could the Americans when they learned the truth. But McWhorter and his crew weren't surprised. They knew what Sherman tanks could do when crewed by soldiers who refused to lose. Not because the tank was superior, not because American tactics were brilliant, but because sometimes courage and determination matter more than firepower and numbers. That's the real lesson of Colorado Kid. Technology matters. Training matters. Strategy matters. But in the end, war comes down to individual human decisions made in moments of crisis. 4 men decided to stay. That decision changed the battle, changed the offensive, changed history. Not dramatically, not obviously, but definitively. If this story moved you, we'd be honored if you'd like this video. Stories like these take days of research to bring to light. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten heroes from World War II. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible story from the greatest generation. We want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us where you're watching from, your country and city. Many of you served in the military or had fathers and grandfathers who fought in this war. Did you know someone who served in armored units? Have you heard similar stories of small unit actions that changed battles? Share your memories and thoughts below. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering these stories. The men who fought deserve more than history books that overlook their sacrifices. They deserve to be remembered, and we're here to make sure they are.